one of the main hang-ups that I had when I picked up the bass was the fact that I didn't come from a background that afforded me tuition. So I came onto the instrument, and then because I'm an obsessive kind of guy, I practiced like mad, and I read like mad the history of music and the history of the player, and the commonality was no matter how old they were, they still had formal tuition.
I've really had a good time getting to know the music of today's guest and getting to learn more about him. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are talking today with Roberto Cassani, who has had such a cool path through the music world. We dig into that. He's originally from Milan, Italy. He landed a record deal early on. You're going to hear all about this, and then ended up in Scotland, didn't speak English, and over the years, he's developed this extremely cool career as a folk musician, and he has, and this is kind of the crux of today's episode, he has been really heavily influenced by Danny Thompson, his bass idol. They have a lot in common in terms of their backstory. And so he has put together recently a bass and voice monologue project called ROBERTOGRAFIA. And we have a little bit of audio at the intro and outro of this. Definitely check out the show notes for Roberto's site and more on this project. And we also talk about what it was like switching to the bass later in life, which he did, how he composes, scheduling creativity, and much more. This is really an inspiring conversation for me, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Thank you so much to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, Steve Swan String Bass, Upton Bass, The Bass Violin Shop, Modacity, Colstein Music, A440 Violin Shop, and Encoda. That's Nkoda. More on them later, but let's dig in to and hear some music from Roberto Cassani.
Hello, my name is Roberto. And this is a true story. It's the kind of thing that people write books about, probably. But I don't think I've got the necessary amount of concentration. Plus, I play the double bass, so here it goes.
I've really enjoyed checking out the latest that you just released. This ROBERTOGRAFIA, is that how you pronounce it? Okay. Yeah. So that's very dedicated to Danny Thompson, and I mean just everything you've done seems really interesting. But maybe we could start by just talking about your getting into the music world. And bass was not your first love, right? Or did you come into the music?
Well,
tell us about that.
I think what is I started off as a songwriter. Mm-hmm. So I come from a very small town in northern Italy near Milan. So I mean the town was empty during the day. Everybody would go to Milan to work, and us kids were going about, and you could really get into your own trouble. And somehow I found music through a cousin of mine that had lots of jazz records, and I was about. All the kids were playing football, and I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I was listening to Miles Davis. So that was weird in itself. And I got into that a lot. And then there is one or two Italian songwriters at the time that took that jazz influence and made songs. And so I kind of got into that. And I started writing songs without having the instrumental abilities to sound jazz. But what happened is these songs somehow very bizarrely went into the hands of another guy in a town next to mine. And unbeknown to me, he sent off, back in those days, there was demo tapes. Mm-hmm. So he sent off demo tapes. And the next thing, I've got these guys on the phone from a big record company wanted to sign me up. And sort of, my dad was a plumber, and my dad had my mom had a bar, and we didn't know anything about music. So next thing, I got signed up by this big record company, and they got this jazz influence. I don't know how they got it because my chord progressions were pretty primeval. But they got it, and they paired me up with mentors to make me grow musically. And my mentor was a gentleman called Giovanni Tommaso, who is a great jazz bass player. In fact, he's the best, and probably the only renowned double bass player in Italy that came up from Lucca. And at the time, it was a time when he was coming up, was the time that Chet Baker was in Italy bumming about, and so I think he started off as his bass player, and then he just grew and grew, and he got involved into loads of projects, and he started working. He played on as a session musician on all the Italian hits, and then he sort of got in. He's been my mentor through the record company, and that's the first time I saw a double bass, and I knew that was going to be my instrument. However, I didn't have the money to afford one, or the space to keep one. So it was many years before I was able to afford one, and then I haven't looked back since. But in the meantime, what had happened also, just to continue with the weirdness, I had decided that I needed to, because I had decided that I started too high. I didn't do what other people did, like playing pubs and clubs and getting to that level. I started at that level with a record contract, and I didn't like that somehow. So I decided to leave, and I went traveling, and I came to Britain, and I met my wife, and I came up to Scotland. That was 20 years ago. But the problem that I had then is that I didn't know any musicians. I didn't have any money to buy any instruments, and also I didn't speak English. So it took me a while to get into gear. And then once I got everything figured out, the record companies were dead. So I had to start. This time I had to start from ground level. I had learned English, and I started playing little songs in pubs, and then got to festivals and radio and things like that. And then I had the money to buy a double bass, and then I bought one of them. And by the time that I started playing it, I already knew what I was going to do with it. But it just took, as you know, my muscle memory wasn't agreeing with me. So it just took me a long time to get it together. And it's still going. I mean, as you know, the practice never ends, isn't it?
The practice never ends. And it's interesting coming to bass, having played something else. You have all that musical knowledge, but the physical. I was talking with a singer-songwriter named Erica Brahman recently, who's in Australia. And she picked up the bass about 2 years ago. And for her, and she played guitar and has played other instruments. But for her, just the physicality of the instrument, and she sings and plays bass. And but it was more difficult than she was expecting, I guess.
Oh yeah, by far. Yeah, no. I just thought, because I had taught bass, I thought about the bass all my life. I knew exactly how it was going to sound, and so picking it up, it was just completely different, And first and foremost, your first instrument is never set up right, and you've got all that mountain of knowledge to accumulate. But also, just, it's hard. It's just hard. And I'm a big guy, and I thought this is going to be a piece of cake. But it wasn't. It was a long time. It was a long time coming. So, yeah, my first venture as a double bass player, within a year of playing it, I had already I was on an album of like a kind of new sort of modern folk group that had some sponsorship from the Scottish Arts Council to make an album, and we went touring and things like that. So I kind of got dropped in at the deep end, and I thought, well, I better be good, because these guys are good, and here I am. I'm part of the band, and this instrument is still fairly new to me. But I just practiced. I did the usual. I did the usual like 10 hours a day practice type thing for a long time, but it was mostly to beat my body into being able to play the bass without bleeding type thing. But yeah, no, now it's a lot easier.
And then you start. So you'd already been doing songs and playing pub gigs, guitar and voice, right? And then more recently, you started doing that on bass, right? Just 4 or 5 years ago, or something like that.
No. The bass. I've been playing bass now for 11, 12 years now, and like in public. So yes. But I think if I were to count the hours of practice, I'm well into hundreds of thousands. So, because it just takes a long time. But yes, so basically to begin with, but the guitar thing, Although I like guitar like the next person, but it was more driven by isolation. The fact that I had moved, I didn't know musicians. Also in Scotland, I placed myself in an area which it's not Glasgow and it's not Edinburgh, so it's a little more difficult to get into. So by the time I got to know musicians, I had already an established act. So I was already getting gigs. So it was difficult then to go back and say, I'll form a band. And the reason why I ended up in a band was because through my act, by then I was playing radio sessions and festivals and things like that. I ended up kind of into like a circle of new folk Scottish singers thing. And they sort of made this band together with like 5 or 6 of us and made us do something together. And that was the first time I had a band. But by that time, I had been already touring Scotland and the UK with a little guitar, singing little funny songs, which was good fun.
Yeah. Well, I love your music. It's such a cool. I've really enjoyed listening. I got to go through and dig through the back catalog too, other things you've done. But like this Robertografia, the about Danny Thompson, right? Yeah, talk about meeting Danny and just your experiences with Danny and who he is. I mean, I know the name. Certainly, he's a well-known bass player. But just tell me about Danny, your experiences with him, and then like writing this collection.
Okay, so this might take a while. So because I love the man. So Danny Thompson is a British double bass player. He is a legend of certainly British music and probably worldwide music. And in my opinion, sound-wise, it's how I identify the sound of the double bass. It's the sound that every time, everybody's got that player that when he's on a recording, it just makes you listen. And I admire every player that there is to admire in the realms of jazz and in the realms of popular music, Ray Brown, Scott LaFaro, Charlie Haden. I love all these people. But when I hear something that Danny has played on, whether or not I like the song, because mostly he's been a session musician for other people, just his sound has always made me go, oh, that's how I want to sound like. Not really, but that's the sound that gets it for you. So I was very, very aware of him when I started playing the bass, and he was always somebody that I kind of listened up to. And then when I was recording my first bass album with this band Kilmarnock Edition, he was releasing his own strings. He had always played spiral chords, and he had this experiment with a British string maker, the Bass Shop, I think it's called. He was making his own strings. So I phoned this shop and I said, "What are these strings like?" Because I had spiral chord on the bass at the time. And the guy said, "I don't know. Wait a minute, I'll get some information for you." And the next thing, the phone rings and it's Danny Thompson. And I thought, this is a legend speaking to me about strings. I've only just started playing. And I thought, what a nice man. So that was then many years later, a few years later, my daughter was born and we stayed in touch. He sent me some stuff, some little presents for my daughter. It was so cute. And then again, many years went by. I went through many bands and records. And then I had the option of working towards personal development, again, with the Scottish government. And I thought, I had friends that had a period of mentorship with famous songwriters, and they got a lot out of it. But because of the idiosyncratic nature of what I tend to do, I didn't really know who to work with. So I thought the only person that I would really like to work with is Danny, because I would like to have I have a very kind of distinctive songwriting personality, but I didn't feel that I had a very distinctive bass playing personality. So I phoned him up and I said, "Would you be my mentor?" And he says, "Yeah." So we were together, and it wasn't really, I was thinking, I was swatting up on every scale in the book, thinking, oh, he's going to put me through my paces. But it wasn't like that at all. It was more a personality thing. It was more like a holistic thing. And through many conversations and visits and just building up a friendship, I just became just the respect for the man grew exponentially. And one thing that he did say to me is that, you know what, forget about that for once. Don't do anything just to make people laugh. Do something that really means something to you, and do it on your own. Just don't do it to sell any records. Just do it for you, for posterity. And I started basically writing this kind of spoken words / music little story about the experience of immigration and integration in Scotland, and then health scares and bereavement, fatherhood, and ending up with basically rounding it up, saying that in a very cheesy way, but hopefully not so cheesy, that love is all that matters. So basically, yes, that's how the whole thing worked out. That's how. So I've put this out. It's got a little monologue with bass, and as you'll have heard, I mean, there is absolutely no chance of this thing making any money whatsoever. But you know, it's been a great experience, and from now, you know, I can just move on, because I can say whatever I do now, I've done something that was really meaningful to me, and so yes, now I can just relax, I think. So that was how it came about. Sorry for blathering.
No, it's interesting. So, you know, there are some bass players. You know, I hear Ray Brown play a few notes,
yes,
and I say, "There it is. That's Ray Brown." And you know, I think about his, and like, it's like, how do I describe that sound? You know, I have certain words. You know, it's just like authoritative, or even like the tone quality. That's sort of like deep bassy, but clarity. Like what if you were gonna describe, what is it about Danny's playing that kind of stands out to you?
Well, it is very, very visceral. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I like it is because it comes from a very working class, uneducated place. And I loved that, because one of the main hang-ups that I had when I picked up the bass was the fact that I didn't come from a background that afforded me tuition. So I came onto the instrument, and then because I'm an obsessive kind of guy, I practiced like mad, and I read like mad the history of music and the history of the player. And the commonality was, no matter how old they were, they still had formal tuition. Something that, you know, Ray Browns, even if you go back as Milt Hinton, you know, all of these people were down with, you know, they were at the Callaway time, but they still knew music, whereas I know music now, mm-hmm. but because I studied it as an adult, I didn't have those opportunities when I was a child. And Danny was the only bass player that started from the same as me. So he came from post-war Britain, where there was no money. He was from a working class family, and he decided, after having tried boxing, that he loved the double bass. He saw the double bass and he thought, you know what, that's what I want to do. And he just took it to his house and he started practicing without knowing what he was doing. So by the time that he learned music, like I did, he already had his style. He already had his sound. And that you can't change that, but that's the beautiful thing about it. And also he has the personality of putting notes in that they're just not in the book. So it's just, so I love that about him. And like Ray Brown, but in a different way, I can listen to any recording that he's on, and I know who's playing bass. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's what I like.
Are you ever curious just what kind of production capacity a company like Upton Bass has? Here's Gary and Eric from Upton Bass on how many basses they're turning out every year.
How many instruments today in America, Togwonk, Business Park, Mystic here, entirely in the U.S., do we approximately?
Just completely ourselves?
Yes.
I think probably up over 1,600 now.
Yeah.
Okay,
coming up around 1,700.
Okay.
Yeah.
The evolution of the product line over these almost 1,700 basses at this point is so cool. From the Gary Carr model to the Bohemian and Bostonian and all the other things that they do at Upton. I just really enjoy their instruments, and I have for years and years. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Upton, and check them out online at uptonbass.com. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass, which is home to the largest collection of double basses on the West Coast between Los Angeles and Canada. That's a lot of miles, folks. Steve's showroom is outstanding. Absolutely worth a visit. It's located just south of San Francisco Airport, SFO, and he has about 70 basses on display. And these basses range from student entry-level instruments all the way to the finest professional instruments. I've sent so many students and referred so many people to Steve's shop. He really does great work. And if you're looking for a bass, you're going to find one that suits your needs, your playing needs, and your budgetary needs for sure. SteveSwanStringBass.com is where you can go. And thank you, Steve, for sponsoring the podcast. Samuel Kolstein, who founded Kolstein & Sons back 70 years ago at this point. Sam was largely self-taught. Here's Barry Kolstein about how his father got into the business.
You know, it was mainly self-taught, but I will pay homage to people that need to be paid homage. He did study a bit with Al Eisenstein, who was a great repairman in Manhattan. He was considered one of the top. And Al was very gracious. He allowed my father to sit at his side, watch him work. But a lot of it was self-taught. My father was a very ingenious person. He really would look at a problem and figure out 5 ways of doing it and then choose the right way always.
Ever since those early years, Kolstein & Sons has been working to solve problems for bass players, provide them with ever better instruments and new opportunities in terms of travel basses and cases and all sorts of things that we need as bass players. Thank you, Barry, and thank you, Kolstein, for everything that you do and for sponsoring the podcast. It's super cool. So I have a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are adults that have picked up the bass later in life, and they will be yelling at me if I don't ask certain questions.
Yeah, go.
So, and some of them have a lot of musical experience, like you did before coming to the bass. And some people are kind of new to music, but most of them have played a few other instruments. So you're talking about doing these 10 hours a day and hundreds of thousands of hours and getting that time, and so you've probably figured out what's helped you progress on the bass and be more comfortable, physically or musically, or to be able to play and sing or speak at the same time. So talk to the people that listen to this podcast that picked up the bass recently. They've got the enthusiasm. They just don't know what to do to get better. What would you tell somebody who's an adult? What should they do to get better at bass? It's a kind of a big question.
The one thing that I know it's boring. And I would love to come out with something that is off the wall and the secret. But really, scales and arpeggio are the one thing that you just have to do. It has come as second nature to me to just when I'm passing the living room and the bass is sitting there, I'll play a scale or I'll play arpeggio up the neck. It's just something that you've got to do day in, day out, every day. Otherwise you just don't get the intonation, you don't get the sound, and you don't get and then the other thing that I found helpful again is to have in your head what kind of music you wanted to make. And to begin with, for me, was what I could play was folk music, because you can't just go from nothing to playing, bebop. So folk music. A few years of being recognized as a player that could get paid for playing folk music, that really helped personally, because you're thinking, I'm not a total idiot, I can do something. And then I got interested in slap bass, and I did a rockabilly time and a swing time, and I did a couple of albums of that, but throughout that process, then I knew the notes, and I knew I was fairly standard at being in tune. And then I came to a place where I thought, I always wanted to be good enough to play any song I wanted. So then that's what I've been working on ever since. And the style doesn't matter. Music is music. But I suppose I'm not very. I don't practice a lot with the bow, although I should. But my bow practice it sort of limits itself on long tones and scales, and be sure that I'm in tune even with the bow. But I've never had the call to play a lot with the bow. So that's probably my area. The lax, definitely not probably. So I can't advise on how to play. A lot of people say play with the bow, play the bow, check your intonation with the bow. But I think if you're not going to be playing with the bow when you're out, then what are you? Don't do too much of it. So yes, honestly, it's just the hours, and having a practice routine really helped, because I always start with scales. And I don't stop doing it until I sound in tune, and then I do arpeggios. And what I do with the arpeggio, I put on a metronome and I change the tempo and the speed every day. So I could play in 5/4, I could play in normal tempo, I could play in 3/4, and I could play different speed. And I'll just play the 12 arpeggios in 12 keys, improvising with a metronome. And then once I've done that, I'll just work on whatever repertoire I have to prepare for whatever I want to do. But it's just the hours, really. It's just the hours.
It is the hours, isn't it? It's funny because it amazes me still to this day how I make progress and I get better, but it's so slow. It seems so slow on a day-to-day basis. If I look back over the last couple of years, I've learned all these new pieces that I never knew. I'm doing things I never did on the bass 2 years ago. But if I look back day to day, I'm like, man, I'm not getting any better at this. But for me, it's what you're talking about. If I just stick to my routine and I just get in the time and try to be in the right mental space as I'm doing it. But I mean, just pull. I've gotten to the point at least where when I unpack my bass, I sort of get into that state where I wanna be playing. And I'd love to know how, because I'm always fascinated with people that I compose a little, but not much. It's not my main thing, but I'm always interested by people that write their own music. Like, when do you do it? How do you do it? Like how did you write? Even we could just take this tribute to Robertografia. Yeah. Like, how did you put that together? Did you write it at the bass? Were you walking around? The ideas came to you? Did you write it on a notepad? Just how does your creative process work for that, or just in general?
Yeah, well, for that particular one, and for anything in general, it just depends. Sometimes I'll walk around. I've always got a little pad. If you're talking about something that has words, I tend to maybe sometimes just jot the words down for some of them, and then trying to shoehorn some music on top of it. And as for the just double bass solo voice thing, a lot of the time, if it's kind of groove based, then that was all written on the bass, and the words went on top afterwards. But they tend to be done quite quickly. It's not Leonard Cohen, so it's kind of done quite quickly and then polished as you go. So I think that although I just put it out now, this thing I maybe have had the gist of the whole piece has been around for about 6 months, say, and then you just correct the word here and there, or the note here and there, or the groove here and there, and then you work on making, because I never stop. So basically, what I did for that particular one, I just started playing, and half an hour later I stopped playing. And that was the album done. So I think that probably I should get a prize for the quickest album ever recorded. Even if it's not good, it's done all live, and it's done in one take, and it's done from beginning to end. And we put track separation when I was turning the pages, basically.
Wow. Okay.
So that was it. So basically, yeah, the more work was trying to saw the pieces together with spoken word and little notes, rather than like the songs themselves didn't take too long. But now, for instance, that I finished this, I've been sitting for weeks trying to figure out what I'm going to do next, and I don't know. So, I mean, sometimes if you don't have a clear mind, nothing comes out, nothing at all. But when you've got the little vision, then it just happens in no time at all.
Do you worry if those ideas don't come for a while? I mean, a lot of people worry about writer's block, or like you got your, but you've been doing what you've been doing for a long time, so you've obviously had lots of creative inspiration. Like, are you concerned if like it sounds like maybe you're in a period right now where you're not quite sure what the next project is, or are you confident that one's going to come in the next weeks and months?
No, I'm not. Don't worry. I would really quite love to have a period where people just phone me to play the double bass on their album or in their gig and not worry about composing anything. Mm-hmm. I would love that. But realistically, I that happens. But I live in North, in the hills in Scotland, so it's not like, you're not talking about New York City with lots of people playing gigs so every time I have to play a gig, I have to travel somewhere. So basically the session work is not going to be astounding. So I'll do a little bit of it, but I know that something is going to come. I've got a few ideas popping up here and there, but I'm not that worried. No, I'm not that worried.
Well, I got to, it just always fascinates me where people live and just like how that, like my musical life is so different just by fact of living in San Francisco. I live in the city. There's all this activity. There are these great old places from the night, the saloon from 1860. There's blues going on every day of the week that I can walk over and see. I used to live in Chicago, which is a very different musical climate, and I grew up in a smaller town in the kind of the middle of the country, which is a very different musical climate. Like, what's it like in where you are, northern Scotland, not in Edinburgh? What's it like living there, and then what's the musical scene like in your area?
Well, Scotland is fantastic. And when I say I'm not in Edinburgh or Glasgow, but it takes me 45 minutes to get to Edinburgh, and it takes me an hour and a bit to get to Glasgow. So that is where you go, and things are going on there every night of the week. The only snag is that I have a family, so I have to, childcare is a massive part of my life. So I can't just every night of the week take myself to the central belt of Scotland to play music. In my specific area, we're very lucky, because there are I play a lot with a lot of really good musicians that are a lot older than me, though, and maybe they have had a career or they've had a job, but they've cultivated music as a side career, but they're really good. Mm-hmm. So although I don't have, like yourself, you go out to San Francisco and you got all this array of music, there is a little pocket of good music that does happen near me, so I can play a lot. But it tends to be a little community thing. You just know each other, and you don't follow each other on Instagram. You just go and see the person face to face type thing. So because you know exactly where they're gonna be. But there are. Unfortunately, although Glasgow and Edinburgh, within Scotland, Glasgow and Edinburgh are thriving, in my area, what happens is like sometimes something will open and it will be thriving for a few months, and then the reality of making a living, kind of selling food and drink to people and having music as a side, then they just sort of take over and places shut down. Mm-hmm. So there are good times and bad times.
This episode is brought to you by Encoda. By the way, that's spelled Nkoda. This app is like Netflix or Spotify for sheet music, and they are working with over 100 of the major publishers like Boozy & Hawkes, Baron Writer, and more to provide sheet music on your device. I have an iPad Pro, but this also works on Android, and I have so many pieces from Encoda loaded up on it. I have all the Beethoven symphonies and their scores. I'm circling things. I'm flipping between the score and the part to show students. I totally love this app, and people like Sir Simon Rattle are singing its praises. It really is the next thing for musicians. It's a subscription service, and you can download Encoda from your app store today for a free trial. That's Nkoda. And thanks for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Each time the string winds around the peg, be sure that it lays neatly next to the previous coil as opposed to crossing over itself, which increases the risk of breaking. Wind each string from the middle of the peg outward, making sure never to rub up against the peg box wall, which also increases risk of breakage. Learn more at orchestral.d'addario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. They offer high-quality, custom ebony C extensions with 2 different chromatic latch options, handmade ebony latches with adjustable aluminum mounts by New Harmony Music, or adjustable brass latches by Rob Anzalotti. Give the Bass Violin Shop a call to discuss your extension needs. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. I have been a fan of A440 Violin Shop for years and years, and I logged on recently to their website, a440violinshop.com, and whoa, totally new, redesigned. It is absolutely beautiful. You can reach out to them on the website. They've got beautiful, buttery double bass photos right up front. And whether it's a bass or a bow or some work on your instrument, repairs or restoration, A440 has you covered. I have been going to that shop since the 90s, and I've never been let down. Check out their website, a440violinshop.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. You know, it's interesting because you got signed. I love your backstory. You got signed and then walked away basically from a record deal, and that is a BMG, right, which is Universal, right?
Yeah, now it's Universal. Yeah.
So and you know, from then to now, you know, obviously, like, things have changed. You mentioned Instagram. You know, we've got so many things. How have things changed in what you do in folk music, which I know is different than maybe, you know, pop music or hip hop or other things, but like, yeah, how have things changed? I mean, you've been working for a while in this.
Mm-hmm.
How have things shifted over the last couple decades?
I think, like for this year, in 2019, I was invited to, I don't know if you ever, there is a thing called International Folk Alliance, and I suppose it's the South by Southwest of folk music, and they tend to do it in North America. So this year it was in Montreal. They do it in Canada every 4 years, and it happens every year normally in the US. I think it's in Kansas City they're based. So anyway, there is this big festival where all the roots and folk music fraternity worldwide converges and talks industry, and there are showcases. I was invited to be one of the official showcase artists this year. So me and my family packed up and we went to Montreal in February, which was absolutely just ridiculously cold. But yeah, it was a great experience because we had friends in Montreal, so that we hadn't seen for 20 years. So we went, and cut the long story short, that's when I was faced with how it is to make kind of roots music or folk music now. And it's just the same as every other music. There is an expectation that people are active on social media. There is a counting of Spotify plays and all of the things that I have ignored because of my upbringing and because of my age. And I will continue to ignore blissfully because I just cannot get to grips with it. And I find them a little bit soul destroying. But certainly, I was quite happy to speak to people there who were in management or label capacity, just without trying to get signed by them. I was just speaking to them because I'm interested in people in general, and they were saying, "Oh no, it's all about that. It's all about you release an album." For instance, they were saying, "Oh, you need to release an album one song at a time, and you have to have a 12-month plan." I don't have a plan day to day. Never mind 12 months. If I've got an album, I'll just release it there and then. You know, it's just all these things that you cannot do apparently in the digital world of music, and folk music is in the digital world of music as well. And although people go about and put videos, YouTube videos online in dungarees, making you believe that they've just rocked out from behind a hay bale somewhere. They're really sitting on their iPhones all day long.
I love that, man. That's I've got no plan day to day either. You know, it's funny because I sort of get weary when I hear about like, oh yeah, you must release one song, and it's so against the artistic sort of, you know, that spark that I love. You know, I just want to be me and do what I find interesting, and who knows what I'll be doing a year from now. But I like, you know, that's one thing I love about podcasting is just being able to sit down and chat and not be like, you know, like scrolling through my Instagram feed or whatever. And so no, that's refreshing to hear to hear that. A totally random question. I don't know. So you were in Montreal, which Montreal in February is no joke. That is a cold place. Yeah,
it was minus 25, like Celsius. It was just instant.
There's a bass player, and he doesn't. I don't know if you have ever met Olivier Babaz, who he lives in Montreal. He's not a folk music is not what I would describe him, but he's a jazz bowing bass. He plays. Yeah, I don't know.
I've just downloaded this course. I've just paid the money yesterday.
Okay, so you know him through Discover Double Bass. Shout out to Olivier and Discover Double Bass. Okay, I was wondering if you ran into him, but what a fascinating artist. Okay, yeah.
Oh. But I'm looking forward to it because, as I was saying to you, bowing is not my strength. So I saw this course on Discover Double Bass, and I just downloaded it instantly. And I only at the moment I only watched the introductory 2-minute video, and I thought, oh yeah, you're amazing. I didn't know he was from Montreal.
Oh yeah, well he's originally from France, but has lived in Montreal for a long time. And boy, I have had such a good time. What a great way to explore the bow if you're not looking to like play the Bottesini concerto or take orchestra auditions or whatever, but you want to do something interesting. It's such a interesting way to like create like walking bass lines with the bow and just some of the grooves that he's got in there. I've been working on that myself, and then I've also got some students, and some of these I'll make sure to link to these since we're talking about because some of them are just out on YouTube. He's got these really cool grooves with the bow that he does, like slapping with the bow, and it's really cool. Yeah, okay. So I was just curious if you'd run into him.
No.
Yeah. But boy, so what's another random question, but the things that are just popping to my mind. So what's February like in Scotland compared to Montreal?
It was like being in the Bahamas, really, compared to Montreal.
Really? It's that different? Okay.
Well, you know, we go cold, but what it is the difficulty in Scotland is not so much the temperature, is the humidity factor that seems to be like just the darkness and everything is gray. You can't differentiate the tarmac of the road from the sky. You know, it's just that there is a state of grayness in the winter in Scotland. Although if you're out in the country like I am, it's still beautiful. You know, it's still very, very beautiful. But certainly the temperature is more or less around, +1, +2, 0, blah, blah. And then you go to Montreal, it's minus 25 with like 6 feet of snow. I wasn't prepared for that. I mean, it would have been worse if I'd come from San Francisco, I would imagine, but it was pretty bad. You lose your spine for bad weather in San Francisco. You know, I complain if it's like a little bit of rain in the air, which is, I never would have done that living in a rougher climate. Okay, I was just curious about that. What we were talking about practice routines earlier. Like what do you have something regular that you try to do regularly every day, regardless of what's going on, like in terms of practice routine? Yeah. So I'll have to do the 3-octave scales in 12 keys and arpeggios all around the neck in 12 keys, and then improvising on arpeggios and improvising on scales for like say 10-15 minutes just to get the intonation going and then to get all the juices going. And that takes me about, say, overall that takes me about 20 minutes, 25 minutes for the whole of that routine to take place. And then I'll try and do, on a bad day, I'll still try and do an hour of practice. So the last kind of 35 minutes or so, I will work on something, whether it is something that I'm never going to play, but it challenges me, or if I've got gigs coming up, I'll have to try and figure out what I'm going to do. Songwriting is separate from that, so I try not to consider songwriting on working on repertoire. I try not to consider it practice time. It doesn't happen. Basically, there's no songwriting getting done if I've only got an hour for practicing type thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So you guys, I love that. That's a great way to look at it too. I like how you separate it out like that. I've got something similar that takes like approximately an hour if I do it. That's like about half of it is fairly established. I go through a key a week, doing different things than you're doing, but with a similar idea. And then I have some technical materials that shift over time, but that I'm trying to like kind of push myself to the next level a little bit. And then I go into repertoire. So if I only have an hour, like you're describing, I'm not working on I try to get an hour of just those fundamentals. But if I have 90 minutes, I can shrink that hour down to 45 minutes or something. But okay, that's interesting. I'm always interested by the idea of a warm up or a technical routine, and then that creative work and how that all factors in. Okay, it's very cool.
Yeah. I find that when I don't do the practice bit, if I miss it one day, or if we're going on holiday somewhere that I don't have a bass, I really suffer when I come back. If I haven't done the fundamental practice every day, it's all of a sudden I really suffer, and things just start to sound not in tune at all, like not even in the ballpark type thing.
Yeah. So, oh man, I know that feeling so well. It's funny for me, if I go away for a week or 2 weeks, I pick up the bass, and for I don't know why this happens to me, but for a few seconds, it actually kind of feels amazing because I remember like, oh wow, I play, and then like reality starts to set in, and then it feels terrible. And then, but even the next day, it's like I'm starting to come back, or I know I'm going to come back, But yeah, I can get pretty despondent that first day if I try to bite off more than I can chew after a holiday.
It's funny, the bass being an instrument like that, because I don't know what it is about it, because certainly I've never been a virtuoso guitarist by any means. I just play a bunch of chords, but I can pick it up. I can not touch it for 2 years and then pick it up again. And apart from being out of tune, I'll sound exactly the same as when I put it down 2 years later. Whereas with the bass, if I don't touch it for 2 years, I might as well just stop playing. It's just like...
That's so interesting. I wonder how that is for like people who piano, they play piano. I mean, I play a very limited amount of piano and guitar, so I'm not like, I always feel like I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah, I wonder if that's something that's unique to the bass, or maybe instruments that require more strength. Maybe tubists have a similar thing with the embouchure. But it's it's interesting. Somebody will have to write in.
Yeah, that's right. Or make a study of it. There's a research paper for something.
There's a good doctoral dissertation for something. Yeah. Man, I thank you so much for reaching out, and it's so cool to. I feel like I discovered this whole new universe with like the work you've done, and I'm a fan, and we got to do a round 2 sometime. In person when I come to Scotland would be even better. But
that would be fantastic. Yes.
But maybe we could wrap up this round 1 with a little advice for young Roberto.
No, please don't do it.
How old were you when you moved to Scotland?
I was 22.
Okay, and and so not playing bass at that point.
At that point, no, but in my head I was. Yeah, only in my head.
In your head, but new country, not speaking English. Like, what would you tell? What would you tell your 22-year-old self about music or life or anything?
I would seriously give myself a huge kick up the backside for even having attempted it. I have a daughter now. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and if I think about what I got up to and the decisions I made in my youth, I'd be like, oh my gosh, No, you're not going out of the house. It was completely ill-advised. But sometimes, you know what? I always had a good attitude, and I always liked people, and because of that, I sort of always fell on my feet, and I feel like I continue to do so, even with the musical output. You know, you've heard that it's not going to make any money, but somehow I just keep plodding along because it's a little bit different and people like it and I like it, and you know, it's kind of a micro universe, and I think it works well if you don't have huge expectations of world domination.
But I think finding something that doesn't include massive world domination is a beautiful thing. Like, you know, doing my double bass focused podcast, you know, like that's a kind of a similar kind of idea, but I'm loving it and waking up and getting a chance to chat with you across continents and seas. And it's like we're here in the same room. It's a strange times that we're living in, but amazing times too.
Yeah, indeed.
L'Italia è bella, sì, I said to my mom. But if you're poor, you're less than zero. And mama, I was born in working class. Yeah, but now there's no such class. I'm unemployed without a euro. Just a massive grumpy
Roberto,
child.
thank you so much for talking with me. Folks, check him out online at RobertoCassani.com, and that's all linked up in the show notes, and his ROBERTOGRAFIA project as well. Very cool. I just learn so much every time I do one of these podcasts, and it's just such a privilege for me to connect with people all across the world. I don't take it for granted, and I just feel so lucky to be able to do something like this and to have you listening to this. If you're new to the podcast, or even if you've been around but we haven't heard from you in a while, I'd love to hear from you. Feedback at contrabassconversations.com puts you in touch with me, and I respond to every message I get. I just love opening up my email and hearing from people all over the world and what they're interested in, what they're doing, guest recommendations, all that kind of stuff shapes the show. Everybody you hear on this show is a recommendation from somebody else. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. And Mitch is making award-winning basses and doing other work as well in the Dallas area, Kilgore, Texas. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper for archiving and cataloging everything we talk about here on the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.